Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me as always. Another week of college football in the books. NFL Week 8 concluding tonight with the Detroit Lions versus the Las Vegas Raiders. A lot to break down here at Saturday to Sunday. Another interesting week of college football, some performances we need to talk about that could shake up the narrative a little bit surrounding the 2024 NFL draft. So, as always, we're going to get right into the NFL draft report for week 9 of the college football season. We'll start off with our S to S teams of the week and then talk about some other things that really stood out that are impacting the draft stock of certain prospects from this past week. So let's start with the first string quarterback of the week. That's Bo Nix out of Oregon. Oregon beat Utah handedly this past weekend. Bo Nix, 248 yards and 2 touchdowns. And it was one of those games that if he needed to do more, he could have done more. But Oregon comfortably won that football game. The first string running back of the week was Travion Henderson out of Ohio State. He helped them easily beat Wisconsin this past week, 162 yards and 1 touchdown for Travion Henderson. At the wide receiver position, first string team of the week, new name to the mix here, Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. Georgia rolled over the Gators this past weekend. McConkey had 6 catches, 135 yards and 1 touchdown. And then the first string tight end of the week, Bryson Nesbitt again out of UNC. His numbers look eerily similar to last week. 3 catches, 89 yards, and 1 touchdown. So let me just kind of go reverse order there. Bryson Nesbitt, again, showing that big play ability from the tight end position. Last week, it was 3 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown. This week, 389 and 1. That ability to get vertical, attack the seam. Nesbitt is going to be a really intriguing, I think, day 2 caliber tight end prospect that intrigues NFL teams with his pass catching ability, his size, his athleticism, his ability to win vertically down the field and be a weapon after the catch as well. Ladd McConkey came into the season with a lot of fanfare as a guy who was maybe, in terms of the offensive side of the ball, the most highly regarded, prospect there for the Bulldogs. He's a guy who I think he's quicker than fast, but I think he's going to run a decent 40 time. He's got really good route running ability, catches everything that's thrown to him. I remember when I was talking about him in the summer, he's one of those guys that I don't think a lot of people, it was easy to underestimate him a little bit. And then you watch him play, yeah, the size is only average. He definitely could add to that 185 frame, but the athleticism, the speed, the burst, the acceleration, he has all of that. He's got very good movement skills. His footwork is fantastic. In and out of his breaks, you see very clean, sharp, crisp routes. His route running is good. His separations, quickness is good. He's very savvy in terms of his route running. He understands how to vary route tempo and understand route concepts really well. He shows really good body control and ball skills. A lot of ability there, a weapon after the catch as well. And he's got great hands. To me, I comped him in the summer to a much more athletic version of Hunter Renfrow. And it obviously might be a little bit of a lazy comp, but in terms of that footwork and that route running, that's really where I honed in on it. But I do think he's got more big play ability, more yak ability, where, a guy like Hunter Renfrow is more of a chains mover. Ladd McConkey is a guy who can make things happen and make some big plays. So it was interesting. It was fun to kind of get to see him this past week, have a big impact on that game and give me an opportunity to talk about him this week here on the show. Listen, we've talked a lot about the running backs, and it's just an overall down running back class. I really question whether or not we're going to see a running back go in the top 50. I'm sure somebody will make their move up there, test better than expected. But I really don't think anybody's separating themselves. Like Travion Henderson, he's in the mix there, but so is a lot of other guys. There's nothing about Travion Henderson's game that is dramatically stood out from a lot of other guys, and I just think we continue to – it's going to be really interesting to kind of see where the running back landscape goes for this draft class, because I feel like we always have had the running back position somewhat solidified in terms of the top of it. Like we knew Kent Walker and Breece Hall were the 2 guys 2 years ago. We knew last year it was Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. And then after that, we knew, it was A-Chain and Charbonnet and Kendre Miller by the time draft weekend rolled around. But this year, I'm not really sure how, we look at it right now. And I think if you ask 10 different evaluators, they'd have a different top five nobody would have the same top five. Some people wouldn't even have the same guys in the top five. There'd be so much uncertainty. So it's gonna be interesting to kind of see if somebody can finish out the year strong. Can Henderson build off of this and string together a couple of really impactful games week after week, and then maybe see a stock climb when Michigan's schedule starts toughening up? Is that an opportunity for Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards? It's going to be interesting to kind of follow these guys. Same thing with Trey Benson, who we'll get to momentarily as well. And then Bo Nix, we've talked a lot about him this year. Listen, this is a guy who's came such a long way, and you watch him play. And again, I think there's a lot of uncertainty after QB1 and QB2. I think Shadu Sanders is going back to school. Quinn Ewers has not taken the next step to be that slam dunk QB3 in this class. Michael Penix has his fans, but there's some concerns there. I like Jordan Travis a lot. He just seems like he's very, not highly regarded in the draft circles. So then you start talking about other guys in the mix, like Bo Nix and Tyler Van Dyke is a hot name that I know they've been talking about at the Prospect of Pros podcast over there by The Athletic. And, Bo Nix is right in that mix, but I kind of agree with the consensus that's out there. I think Shadu Sanders is a round one guy, but he's not going to probably come out. I think Drake May and Caleb Williams are locked into the top couple picks. And then I think there's nobody right now that is really a round one caliber guy. I think you could poke, questions in the Bo Nixes, the Michael Penix, but it doesn't mean these guys might not get pushed into round one, right? We see it happen every year. I didn't think Kenny Pickett was a round one quarterback. I didn't think Mac Jones was a round one quarterback. I didn't think Daniel Jones at the time was a round one quarterback. And all those guys ended up going round one. So we see it happen a lot. The 1 year, we didn't see more of it was that Malik Willis, Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder, and it's proved to be true. Like none of those guys have panned out, and even Kenny Pickett, looks like he's not going to live up to round one long-term starting caliber expectations. So is Mac Jones, and as much as it pains me to say it, probably Daniel Jones on that trajectory as well. Even though we thought we saw a step last year, we'll see once he gets back, hopefully soon from this injury, whether or not he can start looking more like the player that was last year that maybe we thought he could be a long-term starter. There's question marks. And again, it goes back to teams got to ask themselves the question, can this be a difference maker at the position? Because friend of the show who's been a guest on the show, Chris Tripodi, we were talking like the list is short of guys that you can think could really, win without elite circumstances around them. The list is very short. And if you're trying to get to a Super Bowl, you really want that upside to get to that level. And there's so few, right? It's Mahomes, it's Josh Allen, it's Jalen Hurts, it's Joe Burrow, it's Lamar Jackson, maybe Justin Herbert's on the doorstep there, but we still got to see it in some big spots. Trevor Lawrence is not there yet. Brock Purdy has been brought back to life a little bit the last week, and he's got this great supporting cast around him. Tua, great play caller, couple great playmakers, but is he ready to take that next step? If you don't have somebody on that upper echelon, until I see somebody regularly winning the Super Bowl that's not from that elite level, I think there's question marks. Like, Matthew Stafford was playing at an elite level when the Rams won a couple years ago. We'll see. So I think teams are getting a little smarter. That doesn't mean doesn't take your chance in the second round or third round on some of these guys and see what happens, because it's not like a second or third round pick always pans out to be a great player or even a great starter on your team or even a good starter. So I understand why teams take their chances in those rounds. And Knicks will be one of those guys, but it'll be interesting to see if any of these guys do get pushed up to round one mix, once the season's over and the draft process really kicks into high gear. If we take this to the second string team of the week for week 9, back to Caleb Williams. I talked a lot about him last week, having some questions, just in terms of like the body language and the demeanor on the sideline. Well, this past week, he leads USC to beat Cal 50-49. He had 4 total touchdowns, 369 yards passing, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. Again, there could be question marks that arise during this, span of this season. There'll be question marks in the pre-draft months, but Caleb Williams is still a very special talent. and he's going to be the first or second pick in the draft. Like, there's no way about it. Maybe some team falls in love with Drake May and he's more the prototypical size and frame, and maybe that's something. But I still think Caleb Williams is going to be the first quarterback taken, or a team will trade up, even if it's a team that doesn't need a quarterback. I'd be stunned still if Caleb Williams is not that guy. Second string running back of the week, I mentioned him before, Trey Benson out of Florida State. Florida State rolled over Wake Forest. What I thought was interesting is Trey Benson only had 55 yards rushing and 1 touchdown, but he chipped in 4 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Showing versatility. I think it's critical to these running backs. And Benson has not been a guy who's produced any passing, statistics, really receiving statistics, I should say. So even to have that, to show that, I think is important for some of these running backs to kind of differentiate themselves when at least show that they can be functional in that regard. And I think that's what Benson, wants to do, and this performance kind of helps him aiding in that. And then the second string wide receiver of the week, back to Marvin Harrison. It's tough not to have him on this list every single week. 6 catches, 123 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then the second string tight end of the week, Theo Johnson out of Penn State, 2 catches, 21 yards, and a touchdown. I bring him up because he's a guy that, we talked about in the summer. We talked about him last year. NFL is kind of intrigued with him, the size, the frame, the athleticism, the movement skills. This year, he's got 20 catches, 227 yards, and 3 touchdowns. They have another tight end there, Warren, who's another guy who could be on the draft radar, but my guess is he kind of goes back to school once Theo, goes into the NFL. I think Theo Johnson's an interesting guy. Like, we know what the top of the tight end market looks like with Brock Bowers and Jatavian Sanders, but then like kind of when you get past those guys, I do think it kind of, we have the Cade Stovers and the Ben Sinnets and the Bryson Nesbitts of the world. Those are my 3, 4, 5. But Theo Johnson, I think somewhere in that 6 to 8, 6 to 9 range with the ability to move up into even that 6 range for me, I think, based on what we've seen this year, is something that intrigues me. So he's an interesting name that teams are not looking at him. Same way no one was really talking about Luke Schoonmaker last year as a round 3. I think he ended up even going round 2, but no one was even thinking about him as a day 2 tight end prospect during the season. And then in the pre-draft months, you started hearing more buzz. I could see Theo Johnson kind of having that same similar archetype. Brenton Strange went in round 2. So like if Brenton Strange and Luke Schoonmaker go in round 2, I think there's a upward mobility for a guy like Theo Johnson, who's got the size, who's got the frame, who's got the athleticism measurables to maybe move his way into that round 3, early round 4 mix. Other guys in the storylines that I want to touch upon, I kind of talked about all the guys in that, so I don't think I have to go through anybody else from the second string. Riley Leonard at Duke, 1,100 yards for the year, 3 touchdowns, 3 injuries. I know he suffered that injury a couple weeks back, and then it wasn't as serious as we thought. But this is a guy that some people thought could push for round 1, if not early round 2. And now, like, I'm not sure where his draft stock is. Like right now, I would say 8, 9, 10, 11 quarterbacks that maybe have kind of leapfrogged him. When I last did my rankings, I had him all the way now as my 14th quarterback in this draft eligible. Some of these guys might not come out, but I had him all the way down now at 14. And I just think it's been a really poor year for him. Has not stood out. I think NFL teams might still be a little bit more intrigued with him, but I just haven't seen anything when I've gotten a chance to watch him play recently, that makes me think this is the guy who warrants being a top 50, top 80 pick in the NFL draft. Developmental, Dave Reed type guy, sure. Maybe if he finishes the year strong, he can work his way back into the day 2 mix, but I think he would have to finish the year really strong for him to start being considered in that mix again. Other guys that I want to talk about that weren't on the SS team of the week, Devin Neal out of Kansas. Kansas upsets Oklahoma. Neal, big reason why, 112 yards and a rushing touchdown. Neal's put together a really strong year. So we talk about some of the running backs that haven't lived up to the hype. I think Devin Neal's a guy who has far surpassed expectations. A guy, him and, Audric Esteem out of Notre Dame are the 2 of the top names that I need to get into the scouting notebook when I get a chance to start adding some players to that, because Neal and Audric Esteem, I think, are 2 running backs that could very much now have thrown themselves into the mix here in the top 5, top 10 running backs in this draft class. So I kind of want to get a little bit of a deeper dive in Devin Neal and Esteem out of Notre Dame. And then at the wide receiver position, Troy Franklin continues. I talked about Bo Nix before. Troy Franklin, I think, continues to elevate his draft stock securely into the day 2 mix. 7 catches, 99 yards, and a touchdown. And I'll bring him up again because he's always going to be a favorite of mine. Anais Smith out of Texas A&M. He helped them beat South Carolina. 6 catches, 118 yards, and 1 touchdown. When it comes time more for the pre-draft months, Anais Smith is going to be one of my sleepers. He's going to be a guy that I think he arguably has the best movement skills of anybody in college football. I was a big fan of Devin A-Chain coming out of Texas A&M last year. And I've been a big fan of Anais Smith for quite some time. I know the luster is kind of off of him right now. But I think he's a guy that is going to be really intriguing. His movement skills, his ability to make plays happen in the open field. I think he could be an electric returner if asked that, and just be a guy that you could do a lot of different things with. Teams are looking for players like that. I'm still in on the Anais Smith bandwagon, and it's nice to see when he pops up with a big game here. I think NFL teams are going to be intrigued with his, versatile skill set. I still think he might go a little bit higher than people even think once, we get into the pre-draft months, the testing, and more people start talking about him for sure. If we take this to the Devy Slant for this week, 2 names that I want to talk about that I thought stood out this week. One, I already mentioned that Cal USC game, but Jaden Ott was the star for California. He had 21 carries, 153 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I think now you have the Penn State under non-draft eligible underclassmen running backs in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, but I think Jaden Ott is right there with those 2 guys as the best 3 non-draft eligible running backs in Devy right now. I'd want to get my hands on Jaden Ott if I could, because I think he's only going to continue to see his stock soar. I think he's got a real chance in his draft class to be the first or second running back taken. And I would want to try to be aggressive, seeing if I can get him on my team now. And then at the wide receiver position, we've talked a lot about Luther Burden. We've talked about Evan Stewart. We've talked about this guy once or twice already, but Tet McMillan out of Arizona, 8 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown this past week. Guys don't move as fluidly, as he does at 6'5", 210. The catch radius, the ability to go up and high point it, the ball skills, the body control. Tet McMillan, I think, he's going to be a guy who's very much in the mix to be one of the top wide receivers in the 2025 NFL draft when he is draft eligible. So there it is, guys, a quick look at the college football world from this past week. Let's spin this over to the NFL and talk about a little bit of an NFL rookie report for week 7, and then a little bit of the NFL Fantasy Dynasty report. Let's start with the NFL rookie report. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud met this past week. And Carolina was able to upset Houston, who have been playing really well. Bryce Young, I think, played his most steady game, I think, as a pro. 22 of 31, 235 yards, and 1 touchdown. Carolina made a change in terms of offensive play caller. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. But there was also just an opportunity. I think as the year goes on, we'll start to see a little bit more of the Bryce Young that I think we thought. Listen, I still am a believer in Bryce Young. His ability to solve problems on the football field, I think, was one of his best traits and calling cards while he was in college. And I still think he's probably getting acclimated to the NFL. He doesn't have those natural raw tools that sometimes are just going to wow you and stand out. But I thought it was interesting to kind of see things looked a little bit slower for him, this past week. And obviously the biggest quarterback story, I wanted to start with the Bryce Young CJ Stroud matchup, but the biggest storyline is obviously Will Levis in his debut, throwing 4 touchdowns, the forgotten man from this draft class. Most people thought he was going to be a round 1 pick. He was another guy that I thought was more of a round 2 talent. Thought he was going to get pushed into round 1. He actually didn't, fell to round 2. But, quite the performance to start out his NFL career. And I think what you're going to realize with Will Levis is he's got all the arm talent in the world to make any throw, and he is not going to be afraid to make it. He is going to push the ball vertically down the field. He's going to trust his arm that he could fit it into some tight windows. And he instantly created a rapport with DeAndre Hopkins this past week, and he really kind of throws a new kind of buzz and life into that Titans, team base that looked like they were just kind of spinning their wheels a little bit with Ryan Tannehill. And, at this point now, I think it's got to be Will Levis's job for better or worse. Let him grow, let him develop and see what the kid can offer. but really impressive debut performance from him, and just the ability and the willingness to push it vertically and not be timid in his first NFL start. I thought it spoke volumes about the kid's character and just the way he plays. He's going to be who he is. And he, at times, it might look a little reckless and a little inconsistent, but that's who he is. And he's going to trust that he can make any throw, and he's going to give his wide receivers a chance. And sometimes that's fun to watch. So it was fun to see that. Running backs continue to, listen, besides talking about Bijan Robinson, there's just really not a lot to talk about in terms of the rookies. Bijan did get his first rushing touchdown this week and was back in the mix. Still don't think they're using him nearly as much as they should. Jahmyr Gibbs is set to kick off, tonight, and see what kind of workload he gets. But the rest of the running backs, we're waiting on Devin Achane and the explosive ability that he showed in those 3 games prior to getting injured. We're waiting to see him get back out there. Kendre Miller is not really a part of things. And the rest of the running backs, the rookie running backs, just really bit players or barely even playing, to be honest with you. If we take this to the pass catchers, let's start with Dalton Kincaid continuing his breakout. With Dawson Knox injured, he's really morphed in now to a critical part of that Buffalo Bills passing offense. Last Thursday night, 5 catches, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Again, he's going to, if he's not already, he's going to morph into their second option long-term on that team. He's going to be a guy that, even if when the time settles that, Stephon Diggs is not the number 1 wide receiver there, Dalton Kincaid is going to be one of the focal points of that offense. They'll obviously look to replace Stephon Diggs with another talented wide receiver, but Dalton Kincaid, I think, is always going to be on the trajectory to be the number 2 type focal point of the pass offense there in Buffalo with Josh Allen. I think that's what they envisioned when they took Dalton Kincaid, and we're starting to see him morph into that player that so many people love coming out and then love the pairing when he ended up going to Buffalo. So it's nice to see him kind of breaking out there after a little bit of a slow start. Him and Laporta really adding a little something to the tight end mix in fantasy. And we'll see if Michael Mayer and Luke Musgrave can really make it a elite fantasy tight end draft class with 4 guys that maybe can morph into top 10, top 12 guys. We're already there on Kincaid and Laporta. We're talking about 2 guys that might be already warranted to be top 6 in Dynasty, and 2 other guys maybe just sitting there outside of the top 10. As we talked about last year, we thought it could have been a historic class at the tight end position, and it's looking like it will be. At the wide receiver position, Jordan Addison continuing to take advantage of the additional targets going his way with the Justin Jefferson injury. 7 catches, 82 yards, and a touchdown. But unfortunately, Kirk Cousins torn Achilles out the year. That is going to really put dampers on that Minnesota pass game. But I am excited to see rookie Jaron Hall. He was a guy that I was much higher on than the consensus. So obviously hate to see Kirk Cousins injury. Going to be a free agent. But it's going to be interesting to kind of see how Jaron Hall looks in this offense. Can he keep their pass catchers afloat? Does Justin Jefferson come back? A young quarterback doesn't usually walk into a situation where you're going to have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson. That is a pristine setup for a young player trying to get acclimated to the NFL to have those weapons once Justin Jefferson gets back. Josh Downs continues to show why I loved him coming out and why I thought he was right there on the same level as Jordan Addison and Zay Flowers. 7 catches, 72 yards. He's already became better than I even thought he was going to transition to the NFL game. And yeah, while he might be slot only, this is a guy who I think could easily be a 90 to 100 catch wide receiver in the NFL. His route running, his ability to separate. I really love what we're seeing out of Jordan Downs. Josh Downs. He complements Michael Pittman perfectly. And it's fun kind of watching him. It's unfortunate that's not Anthony Richardson, because I'd like to see them kind of develop that rapport for next year. But right now, Gardner Minshew is feeding Josh Downs targets, and because he warrants them. And I think that's who Josh Downs is, who eventually he's going to warrant them from Anthony Richardson as well. And then Quentin Johnson, 5 catches, 50 yards, still just hasn't taken advantage of Mike Williams being out the season. Josh Palmer still seems to be the guy who Justin Herbert looks to. I know Quentin Johnson's numbers this past week were better than Josh Palmer's, but when you're taking first in the first round, the expectations are higher. And right now he still seems behind Josh Palmer, and it doesn't seem like that's going to change. And it's some of the concerns that I had about Quentin Johnston. How is his game going to translate to the next level? He didn't play as a big guy. He played as a smaller guy in a big person's body. And I had a lot of question marks once you took him out of the Big 12 and the no defenses and the defenders, just aren't playing a lot of defense. And right now it's been a slow get for him, even though the opportunity has been there for him to seize that role as the second wide receiver behind Keenan Allen. And if we take this to the NFL Fantasy Dynasty report for this week, not a lot to talk about. I didn't think anything really stood out. The couple of things I did want to talk about were a guy that, I was very high on for years, told everybody to go buy. It looked like a genius move. But right now, Tony Pollard is just not playing like the guy that we saw last year and the year before when I was so high on him. He stepped into the role there. Dallas has had a lot of weird games, but even with that, like we've seen very few explosive plays from Tony Pollard. It's going to be really interesting because I thought he was going to have a great year this year, and he was going to kind of force Dallas's hands to maybe give him that contract because he's a guy who doesn't have a lot of tread on the tires. Explosive player. They don't have a lot of explosive players besides CD Lamb that I thought he was going to make it really hard for them to maybe move on. Now I don't know where Tony Pollard sits, right? Does he get the free agency? If so, what kind of contract does he get if he continues to play like he is right now and not be a guy who we thought was on trajectory to be a superstar? And if he doesn't get some great free agent deal and he's not a clear focal point of an offense like he was supposed to be this year, what does that do to his dynasty value, right? He was in most people's top 6, top 8 running backs, and I think he's probably still there in dynasty. But the question is there's more uncertainty now than ever, to be frankly honest with you, like that you've got to have guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Travis Etienne and Josh Jacobs and Kenneth Walker all over him. And I think right now with how he's performing, even though Austin Eckler is much older, I think you got to have Austin Eckler over him. And then I think when I do my next update, I think I'm going to take Tony Pollard and send them down to 11. And that puts him right ahead of guys like Devin Achane, who, listen, I love Devin Achane, but we still got to see if he could hold up and what type of workload he could have. And then we talked about that next group of guys, Ramondre Stevenson, Javonte Williams, James Cook, DeAndre Swift. There's question marks with all of those guys. So I think that's something where right now Tony Pollard, there's just no way around it. His stock is way down. He hasn't lived up to expectations this year, and it's going to be interesting to kind of see, if and when he can and what that looks like, because I think right now, there's a lot of question marks about him, and I'm not sure that we're going to get any definitive answers if he continues, to kind of play like he is right now. And he just hasn't looked like the same guy. And whether that's him, whether it's the O-line, whatever the case may be, I'm not sure. So stock down him. Jonathan Taylor, I thought looked his best he's been since he came back. He had like 12 carries for like 95 yards and then never got the ball again, which was really, really, really strange. But I still think he's in the mix there. Top 5 overall dynasty running back. It was good to see him look as explosive as he has all year. And then AJ Brown, man, continues to just absolutely dominate it. And I think the question starts to become now is, for most of this offseason, it was Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. They're a clear 1-2 at the top of dynasty wide receiver rankings. And part of it's their otherworldly talent, their age, and AJ Brown was in that next group. And I'm starting to wonder if AJ Brown deserves warrant and consideration with those top 2 guys. And that should be a tier 3, or, based on his age and stuff, like does AJ Brown still in that mix with Amon-Ra St. Brown, CD Lamb, and then a couple older guys like Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, and Cooper Kupp. I think it's an interesting conversation, but he just continues to dominate. Obviously that trade by the Eagles set up a lot for them, and it was a brilliant move. It's still one of the most puzzling moves by Tennessee. AJ Brown is the dream scenario when you draft the guy in the second round, and he turns into that, like in a legit elite alpha number 1 wide receiver. And then for them to move on and then take Treylon Burks, who I like Treylon Burks, but not on the same stratosphere as AJ Brown, who was my number 1 wide receiver coming out that year. It was such a baffling move. And to this day, I still don't understand it, because this is exactly what you want when you draft the guy in the second round. You want him to materialize into literally an all-pro elite level top 5 wide receiver in the National Football League. and A.J. Brown was doing that, and they chose to trade him away and not give him that second contract. And it's going to be a move that I think they regret, for quite some time there as he continues to dominate, now in Philadelphia. So that was really all I had this week. I didn't think there was a lot of major storylines. I think the Tony Pollard one is pretty significant. So I wanted to spend some time talking about that as well. So there it is, guys. NFL Fantasy Dynasty Report for week 8 of the NFL season, and the NFL, rookie report as well. And then obviously the NFL draft report and Devy Slant for week 9 of the college football season. If you're enjoying this content, please get over to the website, rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. Check out our premium content tab over on the website, SS Football, and see if you want to potentially purchase the premium content for $9.99. It is the best way to support the show. We hope if you've been a long-time listener but never purchased notebooks, you consider it. It really does help us continue to do here what we do at Saturday to Sunday. You get the scouting notebook, which has almost 100 detailed player profiles of a variety of guys who are draft eligible. You get the rankings notebook, all our different rankings, tiers, and then you get the NFL draft projections notebook in April as well. So, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.